Good evening. Thank you, or welcome to the June 25th, 2024 School Board Special Meeting. The time is now 5:31. The school board would like to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge we are residing on the traditional land of the Dene people. Our mission is to provide an excellent and equitable education and a safe, supportive environment so that all students will succeed and contribute to a diverse and changing society. The first item on our agenda is public comment. This is a special meeting of the school board. As such, public comment is limited to agenda topics only. This will be the only opportunity for public comment during this meeting. If you wish to speak on any agenda item, please do so at this time. Board members will not be responding to comments or questions made by the public, but may ask questions of the speaker for clarifying purposes only. Concerned citizens should initially discuss matters with the superintendent or designee first. After the superintendent or designee has heard the concerns, then they may be brought to the board. Individual students and district personnel may not be discussed in public testimony. Please contact the district office to route concerns about individual students or district personnel through the appropriate channels. Those who have signed up in advance will be called upon first, and if the time remains, anyone else who is in person will be invited to testify until the 1-hour time limit has been reached. Public testimony will be heard from citizens in the order in which they have signed up. A sign-up sheet is available in the boardroom prior to the start of the meeting for those who have not already signed up in advance. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes each and should provide their first name, spell their last name, and state their area of residence. Oh, I skipped roll. Ms. Richardson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Burgess,
Here.
Mrs. Burnett,
Here.
Mr. Dorn,
Here.
Miss Maple,
Here.
Miss Marati,
Here.
Mrs. Sanderson,
Here.
Mrs. Hardy.
Here.
Thank you. The board has a quorum.
And now we are on public comment. The only person we had signed up in advance before the meeting was Ms. Danielle Logan.
Good evening, President Hardy and members of the school board. My name is Danielle Logan, and I reside in Fairbanks. I also have the honor of currently serving as the ESSA president. In watching the work session last night and listening to the discussions to contracting out our custodial, I have walked away with many questions and concerns. The first issue is that custodians would not be represented by a union and would have to be paid less with less benefits in order for contracting to make sense. We already have a tough time filling all of the district positions right now in this economy. There's simply no way a contracted out-for-profit company will be able to hire and retain non-unionized staff to clean our schools. There are many, many behind-the-scenes duties that all custodial staff does, anywhere from safety, helping in a classroom, maintenance, keeping the sidewalks cleared during snowstorms, and other duties as assigned or not assigned. Our custodians have to pass background checks. They become part of the students' daily school lives. They help protect the buildings after hours, and we benefit from that pride they take in their work. Outsourced janitors will do none of those. I also heard about the student impact. Just because a custodian isn't in a classroom doesn't mean they don't impact the students. Yes, they do have direct student impact. Our staff and students depend on our custodial staff in ways never measured or understood by the district leadership, pushing this terrible idea onto you. They either don't get it or don't want to get it. Please remember the countless hours of testimony that staff and parents gave over the need to protect our custodians. We've outsourced busing in this district. That has been an outright disaster year in and year out for as long as I can remember. We've had to ask parents to drive their kids to school because the contracted companies can't meet our needs. Do we expect our parents to clean and maintain the schools as well? The RFP might look nice and shiny on paper, but it is a disaster for both our current custodians, but for our community and our schools. Last night I heard that this company is being considered to work, in other districts in our state. I'm not aware of what districts they work in, but no, it cannot be a district that compares to ours. Furthermore, I've heard they have been a disaster at UAF, if that is the company that has a contract. I've said it before, I'll say it again, and I heard Ms. Sanderson mention it last night. The Matsu School District tried this not too long ago. Last time they did this, the predicted savings were a loss to cost on overruns, and cleanliness got worse. Safety concerns were also raised, not to mention there was theft that took place. I've often said it, Matsu is an example of what not to do. It will not save money, it will worsen our schools, and would only serve as a message to all of our staff that they are simply numbers on a sheet to you. Instead of being dedicated workers, friends, coworkers, parents, grandparents, coaches, volunteers, former students themselves, and members of our community. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have signed up Leslie Jones.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, board. My name is Leslie Jones, Jones, and I come from Dallas, Texas. I'm part of ABM, the vendor that you're considering partnering with. Last night, we sat through the discussion and heard just really clearly how much you care about your staff and your people. I just want to applaud you for that and let you know that in the service industry, people are our everything. If our employees aren't happy, then the service goes down. So we really pride ourselves on that as well, and I see that as an alignment. I wanted to clear up a few things with some of the questions that were being asked and just provide a little context in my few minutes here. The first is that we are committed to hiring everyone who passes a background check. There are not cuts in our proposal. That is not how we're saving you money. The $2.5 million savings is coming from some retraining, some technology that provides some efficiencies, and really our 118 years of doing business in the service industry, in the janitorial sector, just that expertise. So just wanted to clarify that for the board as well. And I also wanted you to consider the soft savings that weren't discussed last night. For example, workers' comp claims, those hit us and not you. The recruiting, the training, and the hiring time that your HR and your recruiting team, again, that's on us to make sure that those positions are backfilled if there's any vacancies. And lastly, any career growth. You know, we really pride ourselves on promoting within. One of those examples is our SVP, who was at your board meeting a few months ago. He started as a school custodian, working the night shift, and worked his way up to being the SVP for our company for operations. So it provides some career growth within the company as well, rather than just kind of within one school district. Lastly, I just want to touch on the quality. I think there was a question last night about, do we expect quality to increase or maintain? And I just wanted you to know that statistically, we find 80% of principals note an increase in the quality when you move from in-house to outsourcing. Again, because we are taking some new technology and some new trainings and providing some of those efficiencies. So you really see the quality on the back end. So again, just want to thank you for your time. We hope that the board allows us to present to you directly at some point, so that way we can answer some of these questions that maybe came up and just provide some clarity on the people and what's provided. I know there was some gray areas in that last night, and we wanted to make sure that you felt comfortable with that. Thank you.
We do have some questions for you, Ms. Marati.
Thank you for coming here tonight. Just two questions. One, what's your position? And two, what's an SPP?
Yes. So SVP is our Senior Vice President of Operations. Yes, he runs operations for all education partners on the West Coast, and that's Texas through Alaska and Hawaii. My title, I'm Vice President of Sales for that same region. We also have in the audience Mark Ha, who is our Regional Operations Manager. He's based here in Alaska. Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing other questions, but I do have a question for administration about something you said. With the RFP process and contracts and all of that, how would one work out if they were to ever present to the board? I'm not sure how that would happen.
Yeah, I believe after the selection committee has selected a vendor that they would like to move forward with, then the board, we could establish a work session with the selected vendor at that appropriate time, where the vendor could present and the board could ask the questions that they might have.
Ms. Marati.
Just to expand on that, when we were recommended to hire Durham from first student to Durham, Durham came, presented to us directly. We're part of a work session, and we were able to ask him any question we could think of.
I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the room at this time who would like to provide? Just come up, state your first name, spell your last, and your general area of residence. Then you'll have.
Good evening. My name is Michelle. My last name is Thomas, Thomas, and I live in North Pole, Alaska. I just want to say that I am against outsourcing custodial services. I personally am against outsourcing custodial services because our custodial staff have a strong bond with the staff and especially with the students. We have the most caring and hardworking custodians in the school district. I hate to think of having complete strangers coming in to the classroom, and even worse is the close connections our students would lose with the custodians that we have right now. Our custodians go above and beyond their jobs by counseling students, tutoring students, cleaning up, throw up, and etc. And all the disgusting services that I never would be able to do. We love our custodians like we love our own family. And it just upsets me to the core that outsourcing our custodians would even be considered. Thank you very much for giving me this time to testify.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else in the room wishing to testify?
Good evening, President Hardy and board members. Danette Peterson, P-E-T-E-R-S-O-N, FEA President, and I reside in Fairbanks. First, I just wanted to thank all of you for your advocacy, including Dr. Meinert and the executive directors. It was evident before the legislative session even began, and it was evident even today during lunch with the Chamber's luncheon and Governor Dunleavy. And I know board member Melissa Burnett was there, among others, advocating once again for funding for schools. So I appreciate that. There were 45 teacher cuts when you initially made your recommended budget. That represents about 6% of all of our current educators. Since then, I've advocated that those 45 teacher positions be put back on the add back list. Not that I think you can add all of them back, but I asked that you put them back for the purpose of careful consideration. It's not my place to create the budget or advocate for a specific position, but I do ask you to give careful consideration to all 45 of those teacher cuts, from ELP down to cuts at magnet schools, Hutch, as well as PTR increases from grades 1 through 12. All of those impact student learning and impact our district and community in different ways, whether it be removal of the ELP program for the middle school, grades 6 through 8, or cuts at Hutch, which impact our ability as a school district to provide CTE training that is so desperately needed in our local community. So again, please just give careful consideration to all of those. The last thing that I come before you to discuss are the delays that are anticipated for our retired teacher benefits. I met with a group last week, and it is anticipated that they will be expecting delays of about 14 weeks before they receive their teacher retirement benefits. Possibly, this is a good opportunity for ACSA or the Association of Alaska School Boards to work in conjunction with others across the state to be a voice for our retired educators who have given years of dedicated service to our district and now are faced with financial needs and possibly having to wait months, up maybe possibly until November for that first payment. So in the spirit of retention and recruitment, I would ask you to give careful consideration to those educators that recently retired from our district.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Is there anyone else?
Flora Roddy, R-O-D-D-Y, and I live in North Pole. I just want to say thank you for all your hard work that you've done these last few months. I know they've been horrible. We've all been feeling the pinch already. And I just have to say no to outsourcing. Outsourcing custodians is something that I do not look forward to having to do anything with. As I know was talked about last night, it was tried in the Matsu several years ago. They did not have a great experience with it. And excuse my ignorance, but I don't know, have you looked at a group? Have you chose a group? Are they just under consideration? My question would be, are they union? Are their employees going to have benefits? If one of these people from the RFP is selected, are our ESSA folks going to have a stab at those jobs? I just want to support union people and make sure that the people that are doing the work are making a living wage. And that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else in the room wishing to speak? A reminder, there won't be a time later at agenda items. This is our one public comment time. Seeing none, public comment is now closed. I have had a request to rearrange items on the agenda. So as long as there are no objections, I am going to move agenda item C2 up first. Seeing no objections, may I have a motion?
Move to award RFP 24R0001 Facilities Management Cleaning Requirement Service to ABM Industry Groups LLC for an award of $23,374,575.
Second?
Is there board discussion on this item? Oh, Dr. Minor, thank you.
Do you mind if I open with
Yes,
some
definitely.
comments? Okay. So to open this evening's discussion, I did want to let the board know Ms. Burnett and I attended the chamber luncheon today where Governor Dunleavy was the guest speaker. Ms. Burnett asked an excellent question regarding funding not only for our school district, but school districts across the Alaska and whether or not we could count on the $680 per student coming our way. And he emphatically said yes, that he did not intend to veto that portion of the education funding. And so I say that because I think it is safe to assume that $680 for the budget this evening. Of course, if for some reason that didn't come to fruition, as we talked about last night, the board could come back in July or August and pass an amended budget. But wanted the board to have that information because I do feel much more comfortable than I even did last night in terms of assuming that $680 increase. I wanted to answer a few of the questions that were outstanding from last night. We gathered some information for the board and wanted to bring that back to confirm there are 20 total vacancies in our custodial realm, 5 of which are day custodian positions. The selection team for selecting a custodial vendor consisted of 3 non-represented employees, 2 from FMD and 1 from Human Resources. And if everything continues on the trajectory for expenditures for this year, the school district and the board can expect about $9 million in our fund balance. And that concludes my opening remarks.
I have a question for you from the opening remarks. Per our policy, how much are we supposed to have in our fund balance?
It's at 6 to 8% of
I was hoping you'd know the one number that was without the math,
number
but
right
that's
off the
okay.
top of my head. 12 to 15 million.
Okay. Ms. Marati or Mr. Doran? Okay, that's what I thought. Mr. Doran.
Thank you for those updates. I'm going to be voting no on this matter. I know we had lengthy discussion last night, but the things that really stand out to me is, and it's having worked with custodians both in this district and other districts for an extensive period of time, they are educators. And they are significant in their support for the teachers in the classroom, the other instructional support staff, to the students. And I look at that as a real important aspect of what they do. Besides the work, but the work itself is educational. I think it's something that models things very much for students and the interaction that they have. And it's not just during the school day, it's the after school into the evenings that's happening. And actually, at the time, we even had graveyard shifts. I was always amazed the interactions, educational interactions that took place between graveyard custodians and teachers. And sometimes early in the morning for students who showed up. So I look at that, and I have a real concern about contracting out an educator component of our district. I'm also very mindful of their responsiveness to principals, to teachers, to students, to parents who show up. Sometimes parents coming and saying, "We're heading out. We left our boots, our snow pants at school." Those interactions are actually extremely key to community members who come into our buildings, and our custodians have that connection to the district. They are representing us. So that responsiveness is real key. I am concerned about morale to other educators within our district, other parts of our district that would say, well, are we next? I appreciate the update from an ABM representative this evening, because that does answer some of the questions or respond to some of the things that we came up with last night and we talked about, and I particularly mentioned. I do have a concern about whether we're really maintaining status quo, which we know is not as full as service as we need in our schools. versus actually a move to improvement. And that's the thing that it's a financial savings. I have some questions how much that really is there when we juggle all the last pieces. But we need to be looking at solutions that move us forward in the service to our students and families and staff. And last, they're part of a team. And I draw a lot on my experience and that of my colleagues as having been a principal a long time in this district. It's really a team effort with the custodians. I see it today, even no longer principal, but getting into visit schools, and I see that teamwork that goes on between the custodians, the staff, principals, teachers, others, support staff, the secretaries. They're working together, and that's one of my major things of concern here. That where we've sometimes ended programs, they are a loss to our students, to our families. This actually takes a piece of our team and changes that dynamic, not only in the short term, but for the long term. And so for those reasons, I will vote voting no on this.
Ms. Marati, then Ms. Burnett.
First, a question. Are the maintenance of equity funds that are in the state operating budget that have until Friday to be signed, are they included currently in our district budget as revenue?
They are not.
Okay, so if the governor does not cut or veto them, will the board come back together to amend our budget to add those into the budget?
I would defer to Mr. DeGraw. I don't think that's typical, but I'll let Andy speak to that.
No, we would typically, that would happen in the fall as we come back. Certainly our recommendation would not be to build those funds into regular operating expenditures at this point, given our financial circumstances. But typically in the past, we've waited till the beginning of August at the normal time at which the board comes back after the summer.
So, may I follow up? So there's about $3 million that if on Friday the governor doesn't cut or veto, that's an additional $3 million coming to the district that we won't talk about until August. Am I hearing that correctly?
It's closer to 2, and
okay.
if the board wants to come back and amend their budget to include those funds, they certainly could. Given I guess the short turnaround from today to Friday, I think we're in a bit of uncharted territory of unexpected funds so quickly. If this were in the fall at some point in time, what I'm saying is the board wouldn't necessarily go into an amended budget process. Those funds generally would go into the general fund or fund balance to be used to offset deficits for the next year. But it would certainly be up to the board's purview to use those funds.
And just the reason why administration's recommendation would not be to build them into regular operating expenditures is because it's one-time funds that we will not receive next year, and that will just deepen the cuts that we'll have to make next year significantly.
Okay. One more follow-up. Okay, so $2 million could come to the district if approved by Friday, but we're not, as a board, going to consider them for the fiscal year 25 budget because they're one-time funding that could then be an issue next year.
Administration's not making that decision. That would be a board decision, and so
Is that the recommendation that I'm hearing correctly?
that would be my recommendation, especially given what Mr. DeGraw just said is the potential of building that into operating funds that then you would have to cut going into next year. And so as we've talked about, looking at ways to put money in fund balance to soften the blow for next year, given we know we're going to have a big deficit, then that's a good start to that budget process of the next year.
Okay, thank you. I have a statement, but I've talked a lot, so I'm happy to wait.
Ms. Burnett.
Thank you. Sorry, excuse me. First off, I'll start by saying that I will vote this down. But that doesn't set aside my feelings that I do really truly feel we as a board got this wrong. Having this conversation should have happened months ago. This real deep dive conversation that we had between yesterday and today, that this should have happened months ago. I understand what's at stake here with jobs and livelihoods and people. People matter to me just like kids matter to me. My fight on this budget has been children and teachers. Having Barnett teachers, having our Hutchison teachers means the world to me for our students. Having those lower class sizes, I have not backed down from that fight. I will not, to this day, add one more child to a classroom. And if that means I vote this whole budget down, that means I vote this whole budget down. I do not want another student in our classrooms. And so I do truly feel that as a board, we got this wrong by not having the conversation sooner. My goal last night was to point out what we could have added back, what we could have added to our fund balance, what we could have had for this board to help our students, to help our staff. I, again, will be voting this down, but I would like this board to consider addressing this and discussing this when it comes to our strategic plan. We are consolidating schools. We are making moves that will help our budget deficits coming up in 25 and 26 and 27, and they're only going to get bigger. This is a conversation that we need to keep having. And with strategic planning, that's where it belongs. And so I will vote this down in hopes the board will support having this discussion again for our strategic planning process.
All right. So I'm going to put myself in the queue with a question. Given what Ms. Burnett has just said and making sure I understand the process, if we were to vote this down tonight, that means that that closes the RFP, and in order to have this discussion as part of strategic planning, we would have to open another RFP to have a different we would have to restart this whole process. Is that correct?
We would need to start the whole process again. If the board votes this down this evening, we would need to issue another RFP to go through a selection of another vendor. That does not preclude the board from having conversations around outsourcing custodial, whether that be in strategic planning or the budget cycle. It would be my recommendation for the board to have more of those conversations probably in the budget cycle than strategic planning. I feel like that's a more appropriate place for it. But that can happen outside of the RFP process. With that said, if this is something that as a district we think we're going to consider next year, I do think it's wise to get the RFP process started in the fall so that if the board wants to have conversations with a selected vendor, that they could do that in the February, March timeframe as you're working on the recommended budget for the borough.
Ms. Marati?
Thanks. I just wanted to support Ms. Burnett's request and would also like the board to discuss this like we did last night. We had a great discussion about it last night, but it wasn't enough. So whether that's through strategic planning or the budget cycle, I really appreciate Dr. Meinardt's suggestion of starting it sooner because we thought we had time to make decisions this year and we definitely ran out of time. I would love to have conversations, not just about this, but about large ticket items, because if we have a $36 million deficit starting next year, we're gonna have to make huge, large decisions like this, and starting during the budget cycle is not gonna give the board enough time to make those big decisions in a thoughtful and timely manner. So I would really appreciate somehow the board having these discussions. I agreed that through the strategic plan, but if it's more appropriate through a budget cycle, starting way earlier than we usually do, then that makes sense. I'd also like S's voices to be heard more in that conversation about it, because I don't think that they were fully involved in this one. It doesn't sound like they were. and they're the ones that are going to be the most impacted. So I think it's only fair that their voices are heard in this decision. Thanks.
I'm not seeing anyone else, so I guess I'll put myself in the queue. I really appreciate Ms. Burnett's commitment to keeping class sizes low. I share that. I know during our budget that was something I said over and over. And I never would have thought that I would vote to close a school. And I can't imagine myself voting to outsource custodial. But we have been left with some really horrible decisions that are outside of our control. And those decisions are because of actions taken by elected leaders in different bodies. And we're just stuck figuring out what to do with the money that we're given. So going into next year's budget, we could have two choices. We could have a way that we're getting funding and a way that we're not getting funding. And those decisions will still be ones that we're left with. And they're not ones that are anyone sitting up at this dais is making. So I think it's valid for all of us to say that, well, I can't imagine right now, I'll be voting this down today, that I might not be forced in a position during next budget where I might have to approve something like this, and letting everyone know that that's not because that's something any of us up here want to do. We're elected leaders and so are others. I really hope that our community values education. Is there anyone else wishing to speak before we call the vote? Seeing none, Ms. Richardson, would you please call the vote?
Mr. Doran,
No.
Mrs. Burnett,
No.
Miss Maple,
No.
Mr. Burgess,
No.
Mrs. Sanderson,
No.
Miss Marati,
No.
Mrs. Hardy.
No.
Motion carried.
Our next failed.
Motion failed.
Our next item on the agenda is Resolution 2025-01, adoption of the fiscal year 2025 school district approved budget. May I have a motion?
Move to approve Resolution 2025-01, adoption of the FY25 school district approved budget for all funds totaling $234,481,348, which includes the operating fund totaling $198,016,272. I read that wrong.
Second.
Would the administration wish to speak?
Yeah. Andy, were you gonna head to did you have anything? Yeah, that'd be great. So as, I'll repeat what I said last night, given it was a work session. So my recommendation for the board is to fully assume that $680 increase from the operating budget at the state level. My recommendation to the board is also to fully fund charter schools as if the funding was in the BSA. Reduce class sizes by one student for first through fifth grade classes from the recommended budget, which would be status quo from this school year, and then add back the best tutor. Additionally, I believe there's $5,000 left in surplus after you make those additions, and that $5,000, adding that to the board's budget for the Youth Leadership Institute in conjunction with AASB. So that's been a priority of the board to send more students to that conference to prepare leaders, our next generation of leaders. And so that's what I've got for opening comments, and I'll turn it back over to the board.
Did you have a presentation, Mr. Gall, or just questions?
Just questions.
All right. Mr. Doran.
Point of clarification, so the budget figure in the motion includes the recommendations in additional that $5,000.
That's correct.
That's all in there.
Yep.
Okay, thank
Mr. Doran.
I don't have a question. But I want to say that at this point, I'm supportive of it as presented and recommended by the administration. Um, Pleased to get the news from the luncheon today. And, in terms of the governor's intent on the education funding, at least on the 680 part of it. I share the concerns that I think probably every one of us board members, and I think different points we've said, yes, what is our service as the point of contact with students? That's the PTR. It has been growing for a long time. We've maintained it at a somewhat lower level than otherwise might have been, at cost to other programs, other aspects of the budget, and impacting families in our community. Hopefully, we'll see a turnaround with that. But I think it's a responsible recommendation with the slight adjustments in light of our total and anticipated funding at this point. So I appreciate all the effort and thought that administration went into to that, and fielding our questions, our suggestions, and playing around with the numbers. So thank you.
Ms. Burnett.
I also support the administration's recommendation for our budget. I really thank you guys for adding the best tutor back in there. That is something that is really important for me to have back in this budget. I do believe that our homeschool students deserve to have that just as much as our students that are in brick and mortars. I also, spending time in Juneau this past winter, talking with all the legislators that I talked with, talking with the governor, they were very surprised to know that last year we did not put the charter school funding through the BSA like we should have, and that we gave them a lesser amount. And they did not expect that. And that was something that they adamantly have begged us to do this year. And I think that it would behoove us to go ahead and do that, as I've got real concerns about what type of funding we may get next year when it comes to the legislature. So I really do thank you guys for doing this, and I support it.
Not seeing anyone else, so I'll put myself in the queue. I don't love this budget. It makes me sad. It's not what any of us deserve, but it's what we have. And I think we did the best we could with what we had. I am also very grateful that we are funding our charter schools. But I will say, to Ms. Burnett's point, legislators down in Juneau might have intended that, but they had multiple opportunities to fix the loophole. I know that was a letter sent to them, and I know I said it directly to legislators, and yet it was here locally that we made sure that happened. It was a borough assembly that listened and made sure that we had money to be able to fund our charters. And it's a board this year that is willing to do it, that last year wasn't, and that hurt. And I'm just very thankful that we are making this choice this year. And it shows that we value our charters as a district, we value our charters as a board, and that Fairbanks is taking care of all of its students, regardless of where they attend. Yeah. Mr. Doran. Oh, sorry. Ms. You guys pointed each other. Ms. Marati.
I'm still hung up on those maintenance of equity funds because I know that they could be used to prevent having to increase PTR, and I know that's one of the board's and the community's highest priorities. However, I hear administration's recommendation, and I just want your expert opinion on whether you think the governor will pass those funds that are within the operating budget. Because if you don't think they will, then I will step aside. But if you do, then I might keep fighting for them.
Yeah, it's a great question. If I confidently felt like the governor was going to sign off on those maintenance of equity funds, I would definitely share that with the board and think that you should have assumed that within this budget. I do think there's a good possibility the governor may veto that appropriation, given everything I'm hearing that DEED and the US DOE are still going back and forth in terms of their disagreements over what funding should have come to school districts. And so it would definitely be a concession by the state to award those funds to school districts. And it seems like they're still in a negotiating phase with the US DOE. And so that's why I'm not confident that those $2 million might come, at the end of this week to the district.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Mr. Doran.
My general comments, I realize we don't have a comment period at the end of this one. So, I think it's really important that we keep in mind this budget cuts. And so though we are expressing confidence, appreciation, thanks to the legislature, and after we see what actually happens Friday, hopefully all indications are to the governor for supporting the funding this year. But even at the full amount, this represents a cut. We continue to cut services. Next year, yes, we're even farther behind. And I think that's a big thing for the legislature, for candidates running for the state legislature, for the governor and his administration to really understand the impacts of years and years of reductions to school and not keeping up with the increased cost of education. Everybody recognizes the governor has spoken to that. Inflation has taken a big bite out of schools and what we can do. So we need more than what we got this year. And we need it in the BSA, so we're not back there every year. And I would say, yes, if they want it to distribute as a BSA, put it in the BSA. But however they want it, and I think we're making the right decisions on how we're using the money. And again, we gave charter schools not the full BSA distribution. We added to that last year, which was a step that was really needed. It was out of our pattern, and I'm glad we did it. And this year, again, they suffer the same thing that every single school, neighborhood school in our district is suffering. So I'm glad we're doing that. But we need to really promote that we have to invest in public education. And this budget really doesn't reflect that investment in it. I want to make sure we keep in mind those pieces. I do express excitement, as we've been discussing a little bit and referencing the strategic plan. It's what do we strive for as an educational institution? What do we want for our kids? And that conversation is really what will drive our budget discussions. We are often faced with the idea of making decisions driven by the finances. And I hope in our strategic planning, we can step a little beyond that, say, what do we want? And then how do we use our resources? In this case, financial resources, to how far we can get towards what we strive for, and what more do we need. And that actually will set the table for what we advocate for in terms of education, public education in our state. As was mentioned, I'm fully supportive of early discussions on budget. I do want to applaud the administration for even bringing some of those earlier than normal. The budget season starts tonight. We have to be thinking about that, and I think every indication is there, but we do have a lot of budget implications for next year. We can get information before we even get into a formal, I'm thinking of the RFP type of thing. We don't have to get tied up with that. We can have the conversation, and it could be on other areas of our services. And I'm not saying for RFPs, but for what are we looking at? What do we need? Where do we go from that? And so I hope we do start that actually early. It's timely with the strategic planning, but recognizing that finances are one of the resources that help us achieve our strategic plan. But I hope it doesn't dampen what we strive for. It may say how far out, how we get there, and it may be a longer time than we would like to be there. But also the message to our community who really stepped up to advocate for public education at the state level, at the borough level, but also to the all the elected officers that provide the funding to us, that they absolutely recognize that this is not even the certainly not the end of the story, not even the beginning. They have to invest in public education if they want to see us really attract families, attract businesses, and serve our kids to the best of our abilities.
Mr. Burgess? And then Ms. Burnett.
Thank you. I'm going to vote for this budget. I would echo the comments of some of my fellow board members and President Hardy. I'm not real happy with this budget, but it's it's what we were forced to figure out, and I think that we did a good job listening to our community, taking into account all of the information and the potential impacts as much as we could. And I am looking into next year very concerned because all of the cuts that we were able to avoid, we made deep, painful cuts already, and yet those that we were able to avoid may end up back on the table next year. And I don't think that, I think it's important that we're transparent about that with our community. So I appreciate Mr. Doran's comments as well, and I'll try to be brief here because everyone else has said it all. But I do want to remind people, what we need is funding if we want to accomplish the objectives that we have or that we're going to come up with in our strategic plan. We need funding in order to accomplish that. It is a very important resource. This is an election year. There are several seats up in the legislature. There's a mayoral race here locally in our borough. And I would just encourage people to look at the candidates' track records and positions on funding education. And remember that a strong education is a foundation for a thriving community and a thriving economy. So yeah, I'll end there. I'm gonna support this budget.
Ms. Burnett, then Ms. Marati.
Thank you. I thought that we had comments at the end and we don't, so I just wanted to say a few more things. First off, I want to thank administration again for this. Thank you to the board because this has been hard. This has been absolutely difficult. This budget is not what anybody wants. Absolutely not. And this board has done a really good job, like Mr. Burgess has said, as listening to everybody, listening to everything we can, but that doesn't escape my feelings of we got some of this wrong and that we just should have had discussions sooner. And I think had we had those discussions sooner, we would have had more information. And that's not on anybody except for time. Time, we don't have time. We didn't have time. I really appreciate the ad backs and I full-heartedly support them, but I still will be voting this budget down because again, I just cannot add another kid to a classroom.
Ms. Marati.
Thanks. I wanted to thank administration and everyone behind our leader here in the district for your patience, for your innovation this year was exceptional, and for your support of us as a board and the district as a whole. Thank you to this board for sticking with it and going the long haul. Unfortunately, it feels like this is starting to become a pattern of having to make this decision at the last minute. Someday, I hope that can change, but I appreciate all of the work. I hear Ms. Burnett, but I don't think we got this wrong. We listened to our community when Prop A was voted on. We listened to the results of that. We made decisions as we went through the process, and we'll continue doing so. But this is what we were given, and we're making the best decisions we can with what we were given. I do want to note, and I won't list them all, but we did make over $8 million in cuts this year because of the funding that we were given. So as I appreciate the state and the local borough for their funding, it still included the fact that we had to reduce our budget by over $8 million, and that's in the wrong direction. And I won't be on the board next year, but I hope sometime in the future we're not making $8 million cuts, that we are investing in our district and that we're investing in our community and we're investing in our state. So, thanks.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Ms. Sanderson?
Well, I just want to thank the board and the administration and staff for the work. As I spoke to the board about my participation and where I was, I commend the board for doing the work. And I don't think we got it wrong either. I think what is happening around our nation is that school districts are forced to make decisions based on budgets of legislators who are not inside of our classrooms, who don't have teachers at the table when they're discussing educational cuts and funding and test scores that they think they understand, but they do not. And it's a pattern that's been repeated across the country. So I commend this group of people and individuals here in our community. We listen to the community, we listen to each other. We vehemently disagreed about a lot of things, but at the heart of all of it, we kept students centered in front. And as I was president and resided and talked with community people and answered emails with advocacy pieces for our community, as President Hardy has done the same exact thing. This is all hands on deck. We cannot do this alone. Our community, we thank our borough for their step forward in listening and partnering with us. We thank our parents and community, our business partners for doing the same thing. But again, this is a pattern that's being repeated all across our nation. And our students deserve to have a foundation built under them so that they can achieve their own personal and family goals. That's what public education has been able to do. The three that I birthed into the world, that's what this district did for them. My youngest is teaching in the Victorville, California area. And if you think there's any wackadoodle stuff going on, that teaching staff is underneath. That school board is underneath. Those districts are underneath. So I advocate and I thank our community again for your support, for your voice, and for the partnering with this district administration and board to advocate for our students who are looking to us and who have voiced in their own little voices their concerns and what they want and what they are telling us that they need to have a successful academic future. That is why we were elected to do it. I won't be on the board either next year. But with what the past losses that I've suffered, I commend this board because they gave me the latitude to do what I needed to do, and they took on the hard work and finished and brought it home. And that's all we can ask of each other. We can only do and work with the fundings that we have. But I think one other thing that we can look forward to is more partnerships, more internships, more scholarships, grants, and business partner innovative kinds of things that our students can participate in. And you see that already being done with North Pole High School, how they've gone out in their community and gotten internships and partnerships and businesships for their students to be able to network from the classroom right into jobs. That is our future, my personal opinion, is to advocate and partnership and collaborate in such a way that whatever our deficit is with our district, our community, who is already gifted and qualified and professional and certificated, can come alongside of us in a different manner and help us supply what we need for our students. That, I believe, is our future for us to survive, because this is not getting any better. But I do commend you and thank you for your work and time.
Seeing no further comments, Ms. Richardson, would you please call the vote?
Ms. Maple,
Yes.
Mrs. Burnett,
No.
Mr. Burgess,
Yes.
Mrs. Sanderson,
Yes.
Ms. Marati,
Yes.
Mr. Doran,
Yes.
Mrs. Hardy.
Yes.
Motion carried.
I have a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
We are adjourned.